Good evening, everyone. How are you? Now, listen, I'm going to be looking at my phone every now and then. I'm not scrolling through Instagram. I just wrote down some notes.
So he says.
Yeah, I might take a look at your page.
Wow.
But I had some notes that I wanted to make sure that I got to. But basically, we're just going to chat because we chat.
We do.
But I'm going to get this out of the way first, which is I'm really honored to be here with you tonight. As you know, as I've said to you many times, you are one of my personal heroes. And I could not be more grateful to you for all of the ways that you have saved our country. Because we all know that we would be in a completely different place today, politically, if you hadn't done the work that you have done to ensure that people had the access to the ballot and that you got so many people to come out and vote in numerous elections. Without that work, we would not have those two senators from Georgia, Mr. Warnock and Mr. Ossoff. And we know for sure that we wouldn't have President Biden in office today. And she's completely embarrassed, but I did that for me and for you because I know you're all thinking about it. But the last time that Stacey and I saw each other was on the set of Star Trek Discovery. Spoiler alert! Spoiler alert, you know, if you haven't watched the fourth season of Star Trek Discovery, you're about to get spoiled. This, ladies and gentlemen, is the president of Earth.
It's a lot of fun.
Now listen, you have been a legislator, you have been a tax attorney, you are a novelist, a writer. Now you have a new position at Howard University. How is it that you do all of that and you're an excellent actress to boot? We were all on set watching her shoot the scene and we were like, how did that happen?
Okay, so first of all, thank you very much.
It's the truth.
That was 7.5 minutes of excruciating embarrassment.
I knew you'd love it.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I'm glad I got to your water first.
How was that experience for you? How was...
You missed my joke.
Oh, what?
I said I'm glad I got to your water first. So if you'd read my other books, you'd know that was a real threat. No, look, so I actually went to a performing arts high school. And yeah, I've had many lives. So my younger sister is a singer. She's also a federal judge, but she sings really well. So we were really afraid of my parents, and they said achieve, and we believed them. So Leslie wanted to audition, and I'm like, well, okay, fine. She didn't want to go by herself, so I'm like, fine, I'll go with you. And it turns out I could act a little, and she could sing, and so we got to be in the performing arts program. So that is how I became a slightly better actor. I, for a brief shining moment, thought I wanted to be an actor, and then it turns out no.
No.
I enjoy it, but as I watched you all on set, there is a passion and a commitment. And I think you have to want something so much that you can't imagine not doing it. So the things I do are the things that, without them being a part of my life, I'm not complete. I loved Star Trek. I'm good, though. So
You good?
But
because you could come back.
I will. Okay. Anytime. Okay. Absolutely. Sorry. But that was work. That was, I think I was on, my scene lasts less than 5 minutes. I think we were there for 7 weeks. I'm joking.
No, well, but we have to tell them.
It was a lot.
You have to tell them it was a lot. It was a huge commitment, more than usual, because we shot this during the height of COVID.
Yes.
So you didn't just fly in and do this. You had to fly in, quarantine.
Yes.
Stay in this hotel room before she could even get her fitting for the costume, which had to be built for her.
Yes.
Like they build all the costumes. And then you came back, and you left and came back? Did you?
No, I stayed. I stayed the whole time.
Oh, wow, I didn't even know that. So
Yeah.
how long were you there?
7 days.
Okay.
Yeah. It was okay. I mean, look, I got to be on Star Trek. Come on. Like, dude, I was on Star Trek. So it could have been 70 days, could have been, like, I might be there tomorrow. You never know.
But I mean, I don't know if you guys know this, but Stacey is a tried and true Trekkie. And that's sort of how we met, because during the height of George Floyd and COVID, we did a fundraiser for Black Lives Matter, right? I think that's right, and various organizations.
It's Fair Fight. It was Fair Fight.
It was Fair Fight. Oh, and then we did
Yes.
we did something else for Black Lives Matter. But
We've been together a lot.
We've been together a lot. But you moderated a trivia night, right? And she ended up knowing all the answers. So
I know a lot about Star Trek.
yeah, yeah. But we're not here to talk about Star Trek.
Oh.
We are here to talk about your new book, Rogue Justice, which I read on the way home. My brother's here tonight, which I read. Hi, babe.
Is that you?
Where is he? There
Hi.
he is. There's Josh. He'll tell you, we had a 21-hour flight from Thailand. I was working in Thailand. And on the way back, I read the entire book, which is the way to go, by the way. And
You don't have to go to Thailand to read my book.
Right.
I mean, that's one option, but let's be clear.
But like, it was the perfect thing because I don't sleep a lot on planes. I slept a little, but I couldn't put the book down. I'm not just saying that, like, it is a page turner. I listened to the first book, When Justice Sleeps, on audiobook so that I was ready for the second one. Although you don't need to read the first book in order to enjoy Rogue Justice, but you should read the first book. And I thoroughly enjoyed it. I really did. I'm not just saying that. I wouldn't be here if I didn't love it. I love you, though.
Thank you.
But I guess my first question is, what was the catalyst for building this world, telling these stories? Was it Avery Keene? Did the character come first? Or was it the plot or the issues that you wanted to take on?
So in While Justice Sleeps, which I wrote in 2010, so people keep thinking it was inspired by recent events. It was not.
It's not Donald Trump.
No, he was just the guy on Apprentice when I wrote the book. So
You should still be the guy on Apprentice, as far as I know.
So back in 2010, I was having lunch with a dear friend of mine who is Teresa Wynn Roseborough. She was the lawyer who sort of took care of all of us young lawyers at the firm where I practiced tax law. And I begun what my mom refers to as my trajectory of downward economic mobility. So at that point, I was an entrepreneur and a state legislator, so I was not making the money I was making at the law firm. And she was going to feed me, so I was like, yes, I'm there. So we're having lunch, and she mentions to me that she was thinking about something. She's like, Stacey, have you ever thought about the fact that the 25th Amendment lets you remove a president who's incapacitated? In Congress, the terms are short enough that if something happens, you can remove someone by either just don't reelect them. But for our federal judges who have lifetime appointments, they can only be removed for high crimes, misdemeanors, and when they say misdemeanors, they still mean high crimes. It's not jaywalking. So high crimes, misdemeanors, or death. That's it. So being unable to do the job does not disqualify you from serving on the bench. So now put that in the Supreme Court, and in 2010, I was thinking, that's interesting. I'd not thought about that, and who missed that in the Constitution? And so I'm driving home, and there's a story, I think on NPR, about someone who's in a persistent vegetative state. I'm like, oh my God, what if the swing justice on the Supreme Court was in a coma? And that was the inception. And so I got home, and I wrote the first scene, which was actually of Justice Wynn, who is this cantankerous guy, and it was one of the most fun first scenes I've ever written. But when I finished with him, I thought, who could be responsible for the machinations he's about to set in motion? And Avery Keene was born. I wanted someone who had her own trials, someone who was smart, both intellectually but also street smart, someone who was a little desperate, and had to keep choosing to do right. It's easy to be a hero when there's no choice, when you're compelled. it's harder to choose to do the right thing. And so for me, the story was, how do you create a character who has to keep making that choice over and over again as the stakes get higher, and who has to choose to do right when she has all this responsibility but no authority. For a lot of us, we think that those who make these decisions have power. But what happens when you are really powerless, but the powerful need to be held accountable? And that was Avery's genesis.
I am obsessed with Avery Keene.
As am I.
Because I feel like I know a lot of Avery Keenes. You know, these African-American women who succeed despite the fact that they're underestimated, looked over, and somehow end up saving us every single time, right? I mean, whether we're talking about elections or even within our communities, it's always African American, women of color especially, who are always doing the work that needs to be done. But Avery, to me, reminds me a lot of people like that I went to high school with, to college with, the women who are still in my life. Sonequa Martin Green is another one who reminds me of Avery Keene. Tell me about, let's talk about Avery. What was it about her and people like her that you wanted us to understand?
I wanted you to like Avery. I think it's important in novels that you don't just admire characters, but that you like them. If you admire something or someone, you're happy to see it, but when it's gone, you're like, okay. But I wanted Avery to feel familiar, to feel like someone you could know. Stories like this that take improbable but highly possible scenarios. I'm asking you to suspend your incredulity or suspend your disbelief on so many levels. It can't be that you also have to suspend your disbelief about the person who's taking you through the story. And so for me, Avery had to feel accessible. She had to feel real. She had to make mistakes. There's a little bit of autobiography in there, just a tiny bit. But she also, I intentionally set her at, in her mid to late 20s, because it's also a moment where you think you figured out who you're supposed to be, because they've made you make all these choices. You're done with college, you're out of grad school or law school, you've got a job, but you're still not quite sure who you're going to be. And so I also wanted us to meet Avery at a moment where she's still in formation, where she still has the opportunity to choose something else. And while I'm no longer anywhere near that age, I am constantly figuring out what else I'm going to be or what else I'm going to do. And I wanted her journey to feel real and for us to watch her, even though she's doing some extraordinary things. I want us to think, we could go to dinner with her later on. So.
Yeah.
She's not real though, but yeah.
Was that your experience around her age? Would you say that was you at some point?
So I usually caveat what I describe myself. So I'm a reluctant entrepreneur, excuse me. I'm sorry. I started my first business because I decided to run for office, and it's hard to get I was deputy city attorney for Atlanta. I left my job as deputy city attorney to stand for office. It's hard to then go and get a new job by saying, by the way, I just quit my old job and I'm applying for another job, but will you give me a job in between? That does not go over well in an interview. And I had been a tax attorney, so when I was Avery's age, I was a tax attorney. I had this moment where the partners at the firm came to me, and I was one of the only lawyers who practiced my type of tax law. And they basically said, we want you to be on a partnership track. And they said, would you be interested? Because there had been some changes in the area, and I would have been on a faster track. My friend Julie Kane is in the audience, so she'll appreciate this. I'm at a law firm that is willing to fast track me to partnership. And they're asking me, do you want this? And it's a rhetorical question, except that I'm like, no. And they were truly like surprised. like maybe you didn't hear me. I'm like, no, I don't. And I'm like, I owe a lot of money to a lot of people. Mostly it's the federal government, and either they want their money or my education back. I can't say no. But I didn't want that job. I didn't want the life that I had organized, and because I'd always known that I wanted to do public service, that I didn't necessarily know what the job was going to be. I had some inklings. But choosing to walk away from the resources that that law firm provided, choosing, as someone who'd grown up without much, my parents did an extraordinary job with us and were incredibly industrious and innovative, but we were working class, working poor. I'd never seen that much money on a paycheck in my life. And then they would like give you more just for sticking around. It was amazing. And I'm sitting here saying no. I'm like, what is wrong with you? And so I appreciate Avery's conundrums because I had to figure out who I wanted to be. I had to align that with both my expectations, but also my obligations. And that's one of the reasons Rita is such an important character.
Avery's mom.
Yes. Rita's Avery's mom, and Rita suffers from drug addiction. My mother is not a corollary to my mom at all. But my family has, I have relatives, and I've talked about my younger brother. We have dealt with the travails of drug addiction. And when you have obligations that require investment, when you live in a nation that does not provide free access to rehabilitation for most people, there's a benefit, there's a responsibility that you hold to keep that good job. In one of my books, I talk about the fact that when one of us gets a job, we all get a job.
I was just about to go there.
Yes, please, I will stop talking and let you answer
No. We're here to hear you. That resonated so much with me, and it resonates. I'm sure it resonates with a lot of people. That you're, especially when you're at that age, you're trying to make something of yourself and make a name for yourself and achieve your goals. But there is the pull, the personal pull, the family, the obligations we have, especially when you're, if you're the oldest, like me. Were you the oldest?
I'm the second oldest.
It's the same thing. Where you feel like you have a responsibility to your siblings and your parents and all of that. And so there's that constant struggle of like finding the time to be able to do it all. Although, you're like that skit from In Living Color with the Jamaicans. I got 9 jobs, man. Thank you for my Gen X audience members out there. I thought Rita was an incredibly important character as well because it informed us about where Avery came from.
Right.
And it was shorthand. So quickly you understood, this is someone who has had to achieve a lot. Already? Oh, the questions. So I want to talk about the political world that you have that you created in these books. I get the sense from reading these 2 books that the performance of politics that we see on the 24-hour news networks is just that, a performance, right? And I guess this is my question. How far from reality is the world that you draw for us in these books in terms of how people interact with each other in terms of our government? So, I mean, how cutthroat
how much time do we have?
I think we have a half hour. Go.
Look, I try to be as honest as possible. But hopefully when you read the books, and I begin it in While Justice Sleeps, but I spend a lot more time in Rogue Justice really investigating and illuminating the political machinations because they are just as important. In While Justice Sleeps, Avery has to solve a problem. And in Rogue Justice, she's got to face the consequences. Because sometimes solving the problem does not mean the problem is done. It just spawns something else. And even if the good guys win, that doesn't mean the bad guys say, oh shucks, I've got to go home. No. There are more of them, and they're doing other stuff. So part of the dynamic in that book is that and again, it was not intended to be prescient, but there's a little thing about impeachment in there. And what I tried to do was really think about what I know of those conversations. I tend to, my taxonomy of politicians, you've got ideologues who are true believers, and this happens across the political spectrum, but you have ideologues who are true believers, and they are driven by the truth they know to be whole and inviolate, and that they will not yield. Then you've got the policy folks who believe stuff, but they want to get good stuff done. They're not necessarily driven by ideology as much as they are driven by a belief that government has a responsibility and they want to get it done. And this can happen on both sides, again, across the spectrum. And in the middle, you have the narcissist. The ones for whom the power is the thing. The access to power, the yielding of power, the wielding of power. And what happens is that sometimes they appropriate the zeal of the ideologues or the machinations of the policy people. And you've seen people like that. And I'll let you close your eyes and imagine which ones you've seen. And so I really wanted to weave a story that and illuminate that very rarely do you just have a politician who's one thing. They're usually some amalgam of these. And it peaks and ebbs depending on what the issue is. But it's also, it's performance to the extent that they are performing the act of moving government along, and some of them want the act to be achieved. Some of them just want the performance to go on. And so I try to be even-handed, even though I'm clearly, a Democrat. And in my book, my side, my team wins more often. But I don't try to draw any archetypes that are so good that you don't see the parts where you're kind of like, huh. So even my strong Democratic leaders, you see that there's some power mongering there, and they're willing to trade things and trade people to get things that they want. And on the other side of the aisle, they're willing to take some aggressive action to posture themselves. And so, yeah, all of that happens. It depends on, depending on the level of government you're at, that's the scale, but it happens at every level of government on either side of the aisle, no matter who the politician is. And so part of being in politics is that you've got to acknowledge that this happens so you can guard against it, or at least see it when it happens, when it starts to happen to you. Some of the worst politicians were great people when they ran, but they forgot to be good people when they got the job. And so I really want to investigate that and talk about that in the book as well.
You said a word there. I took this one passage out from the book because I thought it spoke to this specific moment in our history. You have a character, Gorechi?
Oh,
Garassi. My apologies.
It's okay.
And they say, half of this country loves Brandon Stokes. Brandon Stokes is the president. Half of this country loves Brandon Stokes, and the other half agreed to just bitch about him. What you've accused him of doing means that everyone got it wrong. The ones who trusted him have been duped. The ones who were suspicious let him get away with it. And I know, I had to put the book down after that and really think about it, because I feel like we find ourselves in this moment where no matter who's in office, everyone wants to be on the right side. Everyone wants to be right instead of do right.
Yes.
When you wrote that passage, you're a great writer, by the way, were you thinking about this current moment? Did it occur to you that you could be speaking to this moment?
Oh, absolutely. When I wrote While Justice Sleeps, it was, again, it was during a president I really liked. But I came of age with presidents that I liked, presidents I didn't like, and watching scandal and politics unfold remotely. By the time I wrote While Justice Sleeps, I'd had some engagement. But, I wrote this one very recently. So And there is a truth to it. There are those of us who are so arrogant about how right we were, about how wrong they were. And we exonerate ourselves from having obligation to do something more about it than talk about it on Twitter. We can be righteously indignant, but righteous indignation is useless if it doesn't turn into action. And
Say it again. Say it again.
And
Say it again.
so righteous indignation is useless if it doesn't turn into action. I'm righteously indignant all the time.
All day. All day.
I always. I mean, like, I stay on a steady hum, kind of like the Incredible Hulk. Like, I'm always indignant. But the responsibility is to turn that indignation into something more than recrimination. Part of the challenge, though, is we let it seem so big and so remote that we can't do anything about it. And that's a protection that we give ourselves that so many people don't have the luxury of. They feel the daily consequences of that disagreement or that disengagement. And they are both helpless and hopeless. And there are those of us who have the authority to do a little bit more or the opportunity, and we abdicate that responsibility because we think, well, I've got something else I've got to do, but I wrote a really scathing thing about them on Facebook. And so part of what I want in the way I write is to remind us that these are people. We can elect them, we can get rid of them, but we're responsible for them once they get the job, whether we like them or not. And it's not just holding the other side accountable as this, faceless mass of bad. It's holding the good guys the people we consider the good guys accountable for the continuation of mediocrity sometimes in our politics as well. And so we've got to hold all of us to a higher standard.
So the prescription is we have to become active in the solutions, right? Instead of sitting back and just complaining about it, we have to be part of the solution.
I mean, look, contrary to the movie, we don't have to do everything everywhere all at once. But we all have to do something somewhere soon. That's our job. And to the extent we're willing to, and it can be something different. Your thing does not have to be my thing. And our things don't have to agree. But if we're all doing something, and I'm going to get so lost in this by the time I get to the end of the sentence, but if we're all doing something, everything starts to change. Because it's the inertia that's killing us. It's the acceptance of mediocrity, the acceptance of meanness that holds us hostage. Because they assume we're not going to do anything about it because we don't.
I think it's that coupled with exhaustion for a lot of people, right? I mean, it feels like it's like, what's that game?
Whack-a-mole?
Yeah, it feels like whack-a-mole. Thank you.
I'm good at charades.
Thanks. Yeah. We'll be a great team. But I feel like, especially in the last 5-6 years, where it just feels like, oh, okay, we won that battle, oh, and now there's this one, right? So it's like you're exhausted. People are exhausted.
I think it's legitimate to feel exhaustion. I think it's sometimes convenient to use that as a reason not to act, because I want you to think about the people for whom this has been all they've ever known. The communities for whom this helplessness and hopelessness is morning, noon, and night. And so this is not castigation. I'm not telling folks to go out and do everything. But I do think exhaustion is a luxury sometimes. I think about my parents. My parents had full-time jobs, had 6 children, and they made ends meet by yanking really hard. And I mean, I didn't realize it was called entrepreneurship. It was just called, they had to do 3 extra things so they can make our lives better. And the reality is there are so many people for whom that is not a choice, it's what they do. And they're tired too. And so we have to decide just how much of our exhaustion we're going to lean into and how much of it we're going to turn into fuel to make us do the next thing. You can take a nap, but you just can't go to sleep.
Preacher. One of the things that one of the things I love about the book is how representative it is, right? How you've gone out of your way, really, to make the cast of characters in our government so diverse. You have black women who are the Chief Justice, the FBI director, the Vice President.
No, she's not black.
But she's a woman.
She's a woman.
There's someone else I'm missing.
Oh, they're...
Yeah, I mean,
well, it's sort of revealed in the very beginning.
Yes.
But I won't spoil it.
But you know...
There's some women who do good stuff and some women who
Oh,
do
right.
such good stuff.
Right. There's that one, too.
Yeah.
I don't want to... No spoilers.
Yes.
But, you know, in reading it and seeing that and appreciating it, I wondered, you know, when you were coming up, were there characters on TV or in film and in culture that inspired you, that you saw yourself in?
So I will say Star Trek was one of the first shows. Now, and I'm not talking about the original Star Trek. We only got ABC when I was growing up, so until Fox came, and don't make any noise. Fox the studio, not Fox the news.
Right.
When Fox Studio, because Fox Studio carried Star Trek Next Generation. And my older sister had a television, so we only had one TV in our house. And Andrea had a TV because she was all special. Anyway, she got it when she was a senior in high school. It was a gift, and so she had it. She was also the only one with her own room. And she invited me into her room to watch Star Trek because she was like, there's this weird show on, come watch it with me. I'm like, I get to go in the inner sanctum. And so we started watching Star Trek. But it was this show that was so thoughtful and so effortlessly diverse, that tackled complicated conversations with authority, but without being preachy. And then, you know, I grew up with parents who steeped us in the history of the voting rights movement and the civil rights movement. I did not see many people. I mean, I remember when Diane Carroll was on Dynasty. Like, that was revolutionary. I'm like, there are rich black people? Where did that happen?
Yes.
I was like, whoa.
Dominique Devereaux.
Dominique Devereaux. And so there were these moments where you got to see it. I watched An Inordinate Amount of General Hospital, which was not the most diverse show at all.
No.
But again, you saw women, you saw different people having access. And so I would say that I've tried to construct in this novel and in the way I write, race matters and representation matters, but I don't do it in a way that jars you and throws you out of the story. I write it so that it feels like it should be. Of course, one of the assassins in the book is a woman. She can shoot too, there you go. And so I want representation and diversity to feel real, and for it not to be a commentary for the FBI director to be a black woman, because I know some really, excuse my language, badass black women who should have those jobs, and it shouldn't be a surprise, and in my world, it's not.
You know, you take on some barn-burning subjects in this book. You know, things that really drive the narrative, like the FISA court, yes. And our electrical grid. You know, those kind of barn-burning subject
He's
matter.
being deeply sarcastic.
Why?
Because, so I have always been curious. I like learning new things. My mom teases us. Like, I used to read the encyclopedia for fun. I'm like, look, you can find something new on every single page. Come on. With pictures. It was awesome. And one of the reasons I love writing, especially fiction, is it gives me a reason to explore areas and ideas and questions that my daily life may not allow. So, you know, when I was writing romantic suspense, you know, I had an ethnobotanist and a forensic anthropologist, a chemical physicist. These are not the characters you're used to seeing in romance novels, but they made sense for me because I got to explore all of these different conversations in a way that was accessible and fun and interesting. And for this story, yes, you don't wake up thinking, what can I learn about the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court today? But by the end, aren't you like, what?
I was.
Yeah.
I really was. I really was.
You're like, they do what? They have how much power? I mean, it's a secret court.
Yes.
That protects our national security, and we cannot see their opinions. They operate in secret. And, I go through all this. But, our power grid, if we understood that there's literally no one really, like power it's a sort of a shared contract.
Right.
But it is an amalgamation of different providers who work together with distributors who hold transfer. I mean, it is really like, if you look at it from afar, you're like, why aren't we all in the dark ages?
Right. I did think, how is this still working? Because we are relying on them to get along.
And you see what happens.
Right. Right.
Well, because Texas is on a different, the reason Texas has had their power grid fail a couple of times, they're separate from they're a separate part of the grid, but they're all part of the whole grid. If you lived in California when California was having its challenges, I mean, it's like twine and bubble gum sometimes. Yep. It's amazing.
Yeah, I mean, I did think, like, because we're relying on them to work together, right, in order for all of it to work.
Yeah.
Like, to have these lights on.
Yes, and please,
right.
electricity gods, I apologize for my offense. Or otherwise known as FERC. Hi, sorry.
Hi. But I forgot what I was going to say. Oh, I also wanted to talk about the fact that, the other thing that you deal with in the book are these deep fake videos.
Yes.
And we're already starting to see them in real life and how they were affecting us. I mean, we just saw that Pentagon video this week, right? How, I mean, I don't know what I'm going to ask. My question is, well, it's not even a question. Do you share my
deep soul-searing
worry,
trepidation?
Yes, about these deep fakes, but also what's happening in AI, and because you also deal with some of that in the book as well.
It really is. The book is not that long, but
it all comes together.
It really does. It all comes together. So part of what I try to do is take things that are very real, that are often unexplored or that we just take for granted. I try to push them to the edge of possibility, not necessarily probability, but possibility. And then skew them just enough that you're a little terrified. Not so much that you can't go to sleep at night, but that your dreams are slightly disturbed. And so AI should be one of those things. AI is fantastical and it is current. My niece, Faith, and my parents live with me. And the first time Faith mentioned ChatGPT, I'm like, what is that? And she was like, I don't use it for homework. I'm like, I know you don't because you're raised better than that. But she was describing what it does. And I'm like, but you're 16. How do you have access to something like this and you don't work for DARPA? And she's like, it's just a website, Stacey. And she's like, Aunt Stacey, it's a website. I'm like, holy crap. So that's why AI made it into the book. But it's the fact that there's no regulatory frame right now for something that is extraordinarily powerful, that is deeply invasive, and that is just beginning. When you hear about machine learning, when you understand that this is the cusp of what will be, just accelerations we can't fathom, and that's going to happen a lot faster than the internet did. I mean, a lot of you in here remember before the internet. And just think about how used to it we've become. Well, think about where AI stands today and all of the capacity that it holds, but also just how polarized we are and how the capacity for meanness has burgeoned. And also how information-wise, we now can sort of curate our own truths. AI will allow us to make those truths real. And so go to sleep.
I'm just...
Sorry.
You just told us to take a nap.
It depends on what our AI overlords allow us to do.
I just can't believe how unprepared we are for it because, I mean, we've only seen, thousands of TV shows, ours included. We did a whole season on, you know, an out of control AI. You know, movies. We've thought about this culturally, and yet we still find ourselves in this moment where we're like, hope it goes okay. I hope it doesn't kill us. There was a New York Times article about it just a few weeks ago, and at one point it said, you know, my biggest fear is that it learns how to build its own weapon and kills us all, or something along those lines. And I was like, well, thank you for that. I'm reading that right before I go to bed. But it does keep me up a bit, right?
It should, and it should be something we are talking about more. The same way we should be talking about ethics in our Supreme Court. It is, anytime, and this happened, anytime the creators of a technology ask you to regulate them, listen. AI creators have said, please don't let us make up the rules. And so we have a responsibility at least to create a framework for how we think about and talk about it, because the gamut of what constitutes AI and what AI is both currently engaged in and what it could be possibly programmed to do is unfathomable. So we need a framework so that we at least know what we're scared of. And we aren't there yet. And so I do think that is something, once you finish all the other things I've told you to do tonight, put this on your list, that we need an AI regulatory framework sooner than later before they write it for us.
Right, right. So my last question, before we get to the audience questions, is, are you running for president in 28 or 32?
See, stop.
Because I don't think you're running this time, right?
I will always be involved in politics. I see politics as one of the most important tools in my arsenal of trying to do good, but it is not my focus at this time. I'm not certain what I'm doing next. It is my responsibility, though, to do what I can wherever I am, and my responsibility is to make sure that we get through 24. So let's start there. Okay.
Is that one of the stupid questions you said?
There's another word I would use, but yeah, go ahead.
She told me backstage not to ask any stupid questions. I think that was one of them, but I needed to know it for my own sake.
In front of everybody.
What's your favorite word?
My favorite word is syzygy. Syzygy.
You're gonna have to spell it for us and define it.
S-Y-Z-Y-G-Y. So I love it for several reasons. Number one, I'm sorry? Oh, I didn't know if, I was like, I know syzygy. Syzygy, basically, it's when three things are aligned, and in the alignment, you can only see the thing in front. So planets align in syzygy, and I find syzygy itself to be a word that looks like a syzygy because it's S-Y-Z-Y-G-Y, and it is a word that has no real vowels other than the letter Y. So for years, I have found that to be one of my favorite words, syzygy.
You learned a lot today.
And if you want to learn more of these words, you can check out my book, Stacey's Extraordinary Words from Balzer and Bray. I say that because my editors are here in the audience, so yes.
You are very busy. You have a lot. Okay, so we'll get to the questions. I imagine most are upset by state book bans, like in Florida. How do you envision a pathway forward to ensure audiences everywhere will have an opportunity to not only your work, like Rogue Justice, but all books?
We have to be loud. We know that Amanda Gorham's book was banned by one parent.
One person.
And the fact that they felt comfortable responding to one parent speaks to the silence of everyone else. And we have to be just as aggressive, demanding that our children have access to books and to stories and to truths other than their own. There is nothing that I find to be more aggressively mean-spirited than denying children access to knowledge. I just don't. when I was growing up, my mother was a librarian. My parents became ministers, but my mom was a librarian at a college. And she taught us to love books. I mean, my parents used to threaten us by threatening to take our books away. Like, that was our punishment. We were nerds, I promise. I mean, we were deeply nerdy children, but it worked. Like, you didn't do what you're supposed to. We're going to take your books out of your room. I'm like, oh my God, no. You cannot have Norton Juster. Anyway, Phantom Tollbooth, fantastic book. Anyway, but what's happening with book bans is that we are denying children not only access to stories, but we're robbing them of the ability to be critical thinkers. We are telling them that the only truths they get to know are the ones that are comfortable for us. And the world doesn't work like that. And being able to read things that challenge you, that disturb you, that unsettle you, and that illuminate your world for you is one of the joys of childhood. And so we've got to be loud and angry about book bans, and we've got to demand that the right to read, yes, parents should have the right to say this is age appropriate or not, but for one parent to be able to rob children of poetry and of access and of history is anathema to who we claim to be as Americans. And so here, very quickly, so here's what you need to do. You need to be, even if you don't live in a community, if you hear something's happening, you have the right, because we're all Americans. We might be segregated and divided into these smaller subdivisions, but we're all in this together. And the reality is, if it doesn't happen at your kid's school, find out where it is happening. And also make sure that the kids where you live or who live adjacent to where you live, that they have access to the books that they need to read anyway. Because it's not just about what they're being denied, it's what they have access to as well. So if you want a to-do list, do that. Okay.
It's just absurd. It's absurd that we're even talking about it.
It's terrible.
Anyway, what is your writing process? For example, do you think of the ending first and work from there, or vice versa?
I think of a question I want to answer or a character I want to learn more about. I then do an extraordinary amount of research just to make sure whatever the topic is, I'm not going to be an expert, but I want experts when reading my book not to throw it across the room saying she's an idiot. I need them to be like, she thinks she knows something. like that's all I need. And then I actually storyboard my book. So I lay it out from beginning to end where I think it's going to go. I am always wrong. And characters always do stuff I didn't expect. People change their minds, and I'm like, you didn't tell me you were going to do that. I thought I understood something, and then I was like, nope, that does not work out that way. But I storyboard to get to the end, and then I make sure that I have a beginning and a middle and an end, because the weakest, weirdest books are the ones where the middle is just a repetition of the beginning, or they're racing to get to the end and forget to tell you a story in the middle. So.
I have a few friends who are also authors, and they say that their characters speak to them all the time. That happens to you?
Oh yeah, I had one character who, I mentioned this, she was supposed to go through a tunnel and end up on a beach, and she was on a cliff. And I'm like, how did you get up there? And it was like 2 days before I realized why she was there. Now, it made complete sense when she revealed why she was there, but it was very confusing, so yeah.
Yeah. I have one friend, my friend Hope, who actually, I was with her when she was talking to the character, and I was like, oh, I don't need to see that.
You don't need to. Okay. I don't believe in having voluble discussions, but I do allow them to reveal their truths to me, and sometimes I listen, sometimes I don't. And we might go get drinks later, so it's okay.
Okay, next question. What can we do as New Yorkers to help support the fight for democracy and civil rights in southern states, especially when young, progressive people are moving away from red states to big cities like New York City?
Okay, so...
the greatest city in the world. Sorry about it. There's a whole musical about it.
I know the line, well done. I will respectfully disagree. However, while some folks are leaving, a lot of folks are staying, and we can't be left out or left behind. So find a group that meets your interest. think about the questions that you have, but don't look away. The most important thing is that when you see candidates, even if you don't know if they can win, invest in them anyway. The other side invests in possibility. We invest in surety. And the problem is when you put money on possibility, you create it. When you wait for certainty, you only get it if it's already there. And we need you before that. And so invest in candidates, invest in organizations. I've created a few. There are a lot of them that exist. There are 2 elections or actually 3 off-year elections, one in Louisiana, one in Mississippi, one in Kentucky. Pay attention. Those governors matter. These are states that have access. 2 of them, Louisiana and Kentucky, have Medicaid expansion. Mississippi still doesn't, but we could possibly win. So just pay attention to the politics of those states, and even if it doesn't look like it's going to work, remember that's what you thought about Georgia about 5 years ago. So,
I mean, not that I'm stalking you, but you did say this weekend on one of the political shows that Mississippi is ripe for progressive change.
So let me say this. Progressive in New York is not the same as progressive in the South.
Oh, for sure. It's not even the same in Queens.
Exactly. And we have to allow for that, because part of what happens in the South is that because it doesn't sound like or look like what we're used to, it gets dismissed as being not enough. I was once asked, why aren't you fighting for Medicare for all when you're running for government? I'm like, I'm still trying to get Medicaid for some. Like, we're fighting some 20th century fights. And so you have to give a little bit of grace if the politics don't completely align with your own, because I can tell you the status quo is horrible. Progress is progress from where you are, not visioning and only working when they're where you want them to be. And so when you look at these candidates, especially Brandon Presley is running in Mississippi, he may not be aligned on every single issue, but he is aligned on enough issues that his success means the success of millions of people. And so remember that progress is relative to where you begin, and remember the South is not where you are.
So this is the most important question, because I'm really trying to figure out how you and Beyonce do it. But when do you find the time to write?
So, my reality is they either want the book or their money back. So the book gets written. But I'm not joking.
Ooh, you got real.
That is the truth. Like, this is not for fun. No, I love writing, but I describe my life as sort of work-life Jenga. And people are like, work-life balance, that's a lie. It is a lie. It is Jenga. So you stack up all the stuff that you need to do, that you want to do, that you must do, and you pull out the pieces hoping the whole thing doesn't come crashing down. Writing is one of the foundational blocks for me. I write because I love to write. I write because I'm grateful that someone actually invests in my ability to write. And I have to turn a book in because otherwise I'm not writing, and I can't live in my house. I have to live outside it. And so, but I organize, I organize my day so that I can get writing done. Jason Richmond, who is my editor at Doubleday, Jason Kaufman, I'm sorry, Jason, I got an email from Jason Richmond before I came in here. Jason Kaufman is my editor at Doubleday, and he will tell you I have a very precise schedule for when he should expect pages and chapters. I'm like, I can get it to you by Thursday on the summer equinox, and it's gonna be this. Alessandra's here. I'm like, if you give me a date, I'm like, I can't do it by this date, but can I have 3 extra days and 4 hours and 13 minutes? So I'm very precise about it because I know it's got to get done, and I want it to happen. I just have to organize it along with all the other things I've committed to. But the architecture I use, and I'll be really fast with this, is Eisenhower had this thing. He said, things are urgent and important. So the things you do, you want important and urgent to be the thing that takes your time. Then you want things that are important, but not urgent. Sometimes you'll have to do things that are urgent, but not important. And then the fun stuff is neither urgent nor important. And the goal is to make sure that your mix is always giving primacy to important and urgent, that if it's urgent but not important, make sure it's your urgency and not somebody else's mistake. And if it's important enough to you, you will make it not urgent, but you will certainly give it a position of power in the way you schedule your life.
I didn't even know I was doing that.
Hey, there you go.
Was it Eisenhower?
Eisenhower.
I went to Eisenhower High School.
There you go.
Little trivia for you. So you like a deadline?
Oh, I appreciate deadlines.
You appreciate it. Yeah, me too. I need a deadline. I'm like, I need someone to be like, get it in.
I just need to know when you're going to start being disappointed in me versus when you're going to start cursing my name.
I concur. Hi, Stacey.
Hi.
My name is Linda Davis Valdez.
Hi, Linda Davis Valdez.
And Linda says she's running for Huntington Town Clerk.
Congratulations.
Do you have any advice for a first-time candidate? P.S. The incumbent family has held the position for 42 years.
Okay, so number one, congratulations for getting started. Number two, remember, talk to everyone, especially the people you don't think want to hear from you. Because you will be surprised. Typically, those who have had power for a long time forget how they got the power. And so don't make that mistake. My dad always told us, he's like, don't tell yourself no, so let someone else do it. So talk to everyone. Talk to the people who don't look like you, who don't think like you, who you don't think are gonna help you. All they can say is, well, they can say many things, but the worst that they can do is not vote for you. But you don't want them to be able to say that you ignored them. Number two, ask for money. Women in particular are terrible about raising money because we feel guilty about it. We don't get to spend it on ourselves, and if you do, you're going to be in prison. So that problem will solve itself. But what you're raising money for is to invest in your vision and to share your vision with others. And in a town clerk's race, you probably don't have to raise that much money, but there's this moment where we're like, well, I don't want to ask. Like, yes, ask. Because again, what can they say? They can either say yes, and here's some money. They can say no, I'm not giving you money, or they can say hell no, in which case you are now just a little annoyed, and you also know they're not voting for you, so you've got more information than you had when you started the conversation.
And I think it's important to talk to the people who don't look like you, who you're not sure about early.
Yes.
Talk to them early, and then talk to them again.
Yes.
That's what I think. I've knocked on many a door. What advice do you have for young black women who want to become writers?
Right. Right. I mean, it seems easy, but we often get so lost in our dreams that we forget to do. We tell ourselves stories about what will happen, what won't happen, and we think ourselves into paralysis. I write. I write things that no one will ever see. I write things that get published. I write things that are in medias res. I write because I need to write. But tell stories that you want to tell, not stories you think people want you to tell. Please clap for that, because that was a really good thing. That was not Jeb Bush, please clap for it. Somebody actually started clapping. And then she stopped herself, and I'm like, go ahead, clap. But so often writers, when you're a young writer, especially a young woman of color or black woman, we think that there are certain stories we have to tell. I just mentioned, I've written about ethnobotany, I've written about Markov decision processes. I also wrote about a grifter whose father maybe have been a cult leader. Anyway, I write stuff that I want to read. I write stories I want to know more about. I don't let myself get relegated into a certain type of writing. I've written romance, I've written legal thrillers, I've written children's novels, I've written nonfiction. My very first publication was on Mesopotamian astronomy, and my second one was on the operational dissonance of the unrelated business income tax exemption. I write because I like it, but we cannot let ourselves be told what we are allowed to write, allowed to read, or allowed to be. That's how you get done.
That book on taxes, I'm gonna read that on my next flight.
You said you don't sleep on planes. I
Right,
bet
that's
you will.
gonna be the one. 21 hours.
It is called Devolution's Discord. It's a very exciting.
And I would devolve into a deep sleep. Is there anything you want the audience to know before reading this book?
I would love for you to get the first book, but you don't need to. While Justice Sleep's available at a local bookstore near you. No, I think, so when I describe sort of my operating principle, I got this question last week, and the answer I gave was real, but I've thought about it since. My mantra is this: be curious, solve problems, and do good. What I want in Rogue Justice is for you to enter it being curious, to find a character who can solve problems, and to leave there knowing you can do good. That's the mission.
So I know this book just came out, so when is the next one coming out?
I'm fairly certain Jason put that question in there.
No, but I'm serious, I finished
There is a third, there will be a third Avery Keene.
And I need it because, I'm not gonna ask this question because it'll spoil it for you, but there are some certain things that I need answers for.
Yes.
Like yesterday. We'll talk backstage.
Look, and as soon as I know them, I will tell you.
Okay, great. You guys, that's the end of our night.
Thank you all. Okay, hold on. Wilson, Cruz, everybody.